My name is Susan Aldridge. I am 61 years old. And I never imagined that this stage of my life would begin with such humiliation. On the night of my son's 36th birthday, I found myself standing in my own kitchen, clutching a shattered plate while 100 guests stared at me as though I was a stranger in my own house. It had started like any other celebration. My son Andrew had earned a promotion at work, and his wife Vanessa insisted on hosting a grand party to mark the occasion. She invited neighbors, colleagues, and friends, filling every corner of the house with chatter and music. To the outside world, Vanessa appeared to be the perfect hostess, graceful in her white dress, accepting praise for the spotless home and delicious food. But behind that curtain of charm, I was the one who had spent days preparing every dish, my arthritic hands aching from chopping vegetables and polishing silverware. As I quietly carried a plate of food to the table, Vanessa's voice cut through the noise. "Susan, what are you doing here?" she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I froze. "I was just going to sit down," I whispered. Her eyes narrowed. "With the guests? You know your place is in the kitchen." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. I felt my cheeks burn, my throat tighten. Then, with a swift motion, she knocked the plate from my hands. It shattered on the tile floor, scattering food and shards across the kitchen. "Clean it up, useless old woman," she ordered. I knelt down on trembling knees, gathering broken pieces while my dignity crumbled with them. For 6 years I had endured her cold remarks and silent hostility, believing that my silence would keep the peace for Andrew's sake. But in that moment, as laughter resumed in the dining room, and I remained on the floor, something inside me shifted. The humiliation did not break me. It woke me up. That night I decided that my days of silence were over, and the envelope I had saved for Vanessa would no longer carry a gift of money, but something far more powerful. For years after my husband passed away, I believed moving into Andrew's home was the best decision. He wanted me close, and I wanted to help in any way I could. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just until I found my footing again. But 6 years later, I was still living under the same roof, and the line between being family and being a servant had blurred beyond recognition. Vanessa had a way of making me invisible. If guests praised the food, she smiled sweetly and accepted the compliments as though she had cooked it herself. If the house looked spotless, she waved her hand gracefully, giving the impression that she managed it all with ease. My part was hidden in the shadows, hours of work never acknowledged, never appreciated. Over time, I became a quiet figure in the background, present but unrecognized, a ghost drifting through the home I once thought of as my sanctuary. Andrew worked long hours. He left before dawn, came home late at night, and spent weekends catching up on paperwork. He rarely saw the small humiliations that accumulated in his absence. The way Vanessa sighed when I entered the room, the sharp tone she reserved just for me, the way she assigned chores, as if I were staff rather than family. To him, Vanessa was a devoted wife who had generously welcomed his widowed mother into their household. I stayed silent because I thought that was what good mothers did. I convinced myself that enduring quietly was better than creating conflict. I reminded myself that Andrew deserved a peaceful home, that I could shoulder the discomfort so he wouldn't have to. But silence has a cost. Each unspoken word, each moment of swallowed pride, added weight to the burden I carried. And on the night of Andrew's birthday, when Vanessa stripped me of the last shred of dignity I had left, I realized the silence had only protected her cruelty, not our family. Something had to change, and soon it would. The change began with something so small that I almost dismissed it. One Tuesday afternoon, I went to the grocery store earlier than usual. As I walked past the downtown hotel, I caught sight of a familiar figure stepping out of a red sports car. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I recognized her walk, the expensive handbag swinging from her shoulder, the flawless hair she had just had styled. It was Vanessa, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, leaning close, was Michael Turner, Andrew's oldest friend, the man who had been best man at their wedding, the man who came to our house every week for dinner. And in broad daylight they embraced, kissed, and laughed as if no one in the world mattered but them. I froze on the sidewalk, clutching my grocery list with trembling hands. My first instinct was to look away, to tell myself I had misunderstood, but there was no mistaking what I saw. My heart pounded in my chest, not only with shock but with a sinking dread for Andrew. He had always trusted Michael, considered him more like a brother than a friend. To imagine that trust being betrayed by both his wife and his best friend was unbearable. That night, I said nothing. I stirred soup at the stove while Andrew and Michael sat in the living room, watching the game, laughing as if nothing had changed. Vanessa brought them drinks, brushing her hand against Michael's arm in a way so subtle that Andrew would never notice. I kept my eyes on the bubbling pot, feeling the truth pressing against my chest like a secret too heavy to carry. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice patterns I had ignored before. Vanessa suddenly had more errands in the afternoons, always dressed too elegantly for a simple trip to the store. Michael stopped by more often when Andrew wasn't home, offering excuses about dropping off documents or checking in. Their phones buzzed with messages they never read in front of Andrew, and small amounts of money seemed to vanish from the household accounts, nothing large enough to cause alarm, but frequent enough to make me wonder. I started keeping notes in a small notebook hidden in my dresser drawer. Dates, times, little details that most people would overlook. When I could, I snapped discreet photos on my old phone. A text notification Vanessa forgot to clear, a receipt left in her handbag, the same red car parked outside the hotel again. Piece by piece, I gathered a picture of betrayal too sharp to ignore. I had been silent for years, but now I understood that silence would only allow the lies to grow. For Andrew's sake, I had to see this through. The truth was ugly, but it was better than living blind in a house full of deception. I realized quickly that my small notebook and blurry phone photos would never be enough. Vanessa was clever, and Michael had known Andrew for decades. If I confronted them with half-formed suspicions, they would twist the story until I looked like a bitter old woman inventing tales. I needed something undeniable, something solid. That was when I decided to seek professional help. The private investigator's name was Richard Hale, a retired police officer who now worked from a modest office above a bakery downtown. I felt nervous walking in, as though I were trespassing into a world I had no right to enter. But Richard welcomed me with a steady gaze that carried no judgment. I showed him the few photographs I had taken and explained what I had seen outside the hotel. He studied the evidence quietly, then nodded. "Miss S. Aldridge," he said, "this goes deeper than you realize. If you want the truth, I can get it for you." For 2 weeks, Richard followed Vanessa and Michael. He documented their meetings, gathered financial records, and checked public archives. When he finally returned, he carried a thick file that made my stomach twist before I even opened it. Inside were photographs far clearer than mine, Vanessa and Michael together at restaurants, leaving hotels, exchanging envelopes. There were bank records showing small but steady transfers from Andrew's accounts to places they should never have gone. And most shocking of all, there were documents revealing that Vanessa wasn't even Vanessa. Her real name was Carla Ramirez. Before marrying Andrew, she had lived in Nevada under a different identity. Richard slid across a photocopy of a marriage certificate. Carla Ramirez legally married to a man named Robert Castillo. That meant her marriage to Andrew was never valid. My hands shook as I read the words, the room spinning around me. Andrew, my hard-working son who believed he had built a safe and stable family, was living with a woman whose entire life was a fabrication. Richard spoke gently but firmly. "She's not just unfaithful. She's part of a pattern. Multiple names, multiple husbands, bank accounts drained and abandoned. She and this Michael Turner may have been working together for years. Your son isn't their first victim. He's just the most profitable one." I left his office with the file clutched against my chest, a storm raging inside me. The woman who dismissed me as useless had built her life on lies. And now, at last, I had proof strong enough to bring her empire crashing down. Back in my small room at the end of the hall, I placed the thick folder on my desk and stared at it for a long time. For months, I had saved an envelope with $40,000 inside, money scraped together from my widow's pension, careful budgeting, and little sacrifices that no one else noticed. My original plan was simple and naive. Give the money to Vanessa as a gesture of goodwill, hoping she might finally see me as more than an unwelcome burden. But after reading Richard Hale's report, I realized how foolish that plan had been. If I had handed her the envelope, she would have spent it in a week and laughed at my gullibility. Instead, I pulled out a different envelope. It was plain, the kind you buy in a pack of 50, but what it held had the power to change everything. Into it, I slipped the clearest photograph of Vanessa and Michael leaving the hotel, along with copies of the marriage certificate that proved her legal tie to another man. I added the bank statements showing Andrew's money flowing into accounts overseas. The envelope was no longer a gift of money. It was a gift of truth, one that would pierce through every lie she had told. In the days leading up to Andrew's promotion dinner, I kept the envelope hidden behind a row of cookbooks in the kitchen. Each time I saw Vanessa strut through the house, issuing orders as though she owned every inch of it, I felt a surge of resolve. She believed she had fooled everyone, but she had underestimated the one person she considered powerless. She had mistaken my silence for weakness. That was her greatest mistake. I knew the dinner would be filled with influential guests, colleagues, neighbors, and of course, Michael. Vanessa had orchestrated the evening to shine, to bask in admiration for Andrew's success while presenting herself as the perfect wife. But that night, I planned to step out of the shadows, no longer the quiet servant, no longer invisible. I would walk into that dining room and hand her an envelope that would shatter the world she had built brick by brick, and I would do it in front of everyone. The night of Andrew's promotion dinner arrived with a kind of tension that only I seemed to notice. Vanessa glided through the house in a sapphire blue dress that shimmered under the chandelier light. She had arranged the table with expensive flowers, hired a pianist to play softly in the background, and greeted every guest with that polished smile she wore like armor. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect hostess. To me, she looked like a predator circling her prey. Andrew returned from work just in time, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but proud. He kissed Vanessa's cheek, grateful for her efforts, never suspecting the truth behind her performance. Then Michael Turner arrived, carrying a bottle of wine, his voice booming as he congratulated Andrew like the loyal friend he pretended to be. The sight of him made my stomach twist, but I kept my expression steady. Tonight was not about anger, it was about evidence. Dinner unfolded like a script Vanessa had rehearsed 100 times. Guests complimented the food, which I had spent the day preparing, and she accepted the praise with feigned humility. Andrew's colleagues laughed at Michael's jokes. Glasses clinked, candles flickered, and for a moment it almost looked like the picture of success. Almost. Then Vanessa rose to make a toast. Her glass of wine caught the light as she smiled at Andrew. "To my wonderful husband," she declared, "whose hard work gives us this beautiful life. And to Michael, who has been like family to us all these years." The room filled with polite applause. That was my cue. I slipped off my apron and stepped into the dining room. Conversations faltered. Forks rested on plates. I had never interrupted one of Vanessa's dinners before. My voice was calm, but it carried. "Vanessa," I said, "I think there's something you should see." Her smile froze. "Susan, we're in the middle of a toast," she replied sharply. "Whatever it is can wait." I shook my head. "No, it can't." From the pocket of my cardigan I pulled out the envelope. "I prepared this for you. Consider it a gift." She hesitated before taking it. The room so silent that I could hear the crinkle of paper as she slid out the first photograph. It showed her and Michael locked in an embrace outside the hotel, their faces unmistakable. The color drained from her cheeks. She swayed slightly, her glass nearly slipping from her hand. Gasps echoed around the table. Michael's confident smile collapsed into panic. Andrew leaned forward, confusion etched across his face. "What is this?" he demanded. Vanessa fumbled with the papers, pulling out the marriage certificate bearing another man's name beside hers. Then came the bank statements, rows of transfers leading to offshore accounts. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching the papers as if they were knives. Andrew stood frozen, staring at his wife and his best friend, realization dawning with each passing second. "Michael," he said, his voice shaking, "tell me this isn't true." Michael opened his mouth, but no excuse came. The silence was its own confession. The guests looked from one face to another, stunned. Some whispered, others simply stared. I placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder, steadying him. "There's more in the envelope," I said softly. "Enough to show you who she really is." Andrew's hands trembled as he gathered the scattered documents from the table, his world crumbling piece by piece. Vanessa sat on the floor, tears streaking her makeup, but they were not tears of regret. They were tears of fear. Her empire of lies had just collapsed, and she knew it. The dining room cleared quickly after the revelation. Guests excused themselves in awkward silence, eager to escape the discomfort that hung in the air. Within minutes, only Andrew, Vanessa, Michael, and I remained. Andrew stood rigid, clutching the documents, his face pale with shock. Vanessa sat collapsed on the floor, her sobs filling the silence. Michael lingered near the doorway, torn between leaving and defending himself. "Get out," Andrew finally said, his voice low but steady, his eyes locked on Michael. "Leave this house and don't come back." Michael raised his hands as if to protest, but Andrew's glare silenced him. He left without another word, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Andrew then turned to Vanessa, who was still clutching the marriage certificate in her trembling hands. "How much of this is true?" he asked. For the first time in years, Vanessa dropped the mask. Her voice cracked. All of it. The admission fell into the room like a final blow. Andrew's shoulders sagged, his trust shattered beyond repair. The next morning, Andrew contacted a lawyer. With the documents Richard Hale had gathered, the case was clear. The marriage was invalid because of bigamy, and Vanessa Carla Ramirez had no legal claim to Andrew's assets. The lawyer also uncovered years of fraudulent transfers, enough to open a civil case for the stolen money. Michael, sensing the walls closing in, reappeared a week later with his own lawyer. In exchange for immunity, he provided testimony against Carla, handing over records of their schemes. His betrayal was as swift as it was cold, leaving Carla without an ally. Carla's fury was spectacular. She stormed back into the house one evening, shouting threats, breaking dishes, declaring that she would destroy us all. But Andrew had already filed for a restraining order, and the police escorted her out within minutes. The woman who had spent years controlling the household was now a fugitive in her own story. It didn't take long before news came from Florida. Carla had been arrested while trying to swindle an elderly widower. This time her charm had failed her. Her past had finally caught up, and she was left with nothing but the ruins of her lies. The weeks after Carla's arrest felt strangely quiet. For the first time in years, the house was free of tension, free of the constant feeling that one wrong word could spark conflict. Andrew moved through the rooms as though he were rediscovering them, pausing to notice details he had ignored before the family photos on the wall. The flowers I tended in the garden, the scent of fresh bread cooling on the counter. It was as if he were waking from a long, restless dream. One evening, Andrew sat across from me at the kitchen table, his eyes heavy with regret. "Mom," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. I let her treat you like a servant in your own home. I saw the way she dismissed you, but I chose to believe her excuses instead of your silence. I should have protected you." His voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while, I saw not the confident man he had become but the boy I had raised, ashamed of letting me down. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't need to apologize for being deceived," I told him. "We all want to believe in the people we love. What matters now is that you know the truth." His grip tightened, and I knew that in that moment he was promising never to doubt me again. With the money I had once planned to give to Carla, I finally allowed myself small joys. I signed up for painting classes at the community center, bought a shelf of novels I had long wanted to read, and redecorated my room with colors that made me smile. For the first time in years, I invested in myself. Andrew, too, began to heal. He reconnected with old friends, started cooking again, and laughed more freely. A year later, he introduced me to Melissa Clark, a nurse with kind eyes and a grounded spirit. She treated me with respect from the very beginning, offering to help in the kitchen and listening to my stories without impatience. Watching Andrew with her, I saw a gentleness and honesty that had been missing for far too long. The wounds were healing, and we were building something real again. Looking back now, I see that night in the dining room as both an ending and a beginning. It was the end of years spent living in silence, bowing to cruelty, and convincing myself that peace was worth the price of my dignity. But it was also the beginning of something far more important, a life where truth, respect, and genuine love could finally take root again. Vanessa Carla believed my silence meant weakness. She mistook patience for submission. What she never understood was that silence can also be strength, a strength that waits for the right moment to speak. And when that moment came, a single envelope was enough to dismantle years of deception. Andrew and I still talk about that night sometimes, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He tells me it taught him that loyalty is more than blind trust. It is about listening, noticing, and standing up when something feels wrong. For me, it reminded me that no matter how small or overlooked we may feel, the truth gives us power. Even in the quietest voices, truth carries weight. Today, our home is filled with the sound of laughter again. The garden is blooming. Andrew is building a future with someone who respects him, and I am painting canvases that brighten the walls. Life is not perfect, but it is honest, and that is enough. To those listening, I want to leave you with this: never confuse silence with weakness, and never believe that age strips away value. Dignity does not fade with time. If you ever feel invisible, remember that your story, your truth, can change everything when spoken at the right moment. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so I can continue bringing you more stories of resilience and truth. Until next time, thank you for being here with me.